Ride or die.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint.
Ride or die.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I decided to do a quick little intro to this. Appreciate my friend who edited the video and sent it back to me. Much appreciated. So in this clip, which you'll see a few clips and you also see the full conversation, you'll see that the objection will be an infinite God trying to fit into a finite universe, but the Christian never says that all of God can fit into the finite. I don't think that's ever been the claim. Also, there's other concepts like God being everywhere, but not, being like in my big toe, or, but he can still interact with this environment. But anyway, you'll see some of the objections. You'll see me be a little bit more forceful than normal, but that's kind of the way Clubhouse goes. If you don't, you'll get like ran over, people will overtalk you, and actually you'll see me decide to leave at the very end of this clip once Shadid, who's a Muslim apologist, who's also like muted me several times before. I've been, booted down to the audience. He misrepresents Christianity over and over. He was fine with letting two people talk to me at once who are disagreeing with me, making different objections and then similar objections. But the second you'll see when Dr. Khalil jumped in just to kind of steelman my position and to try to help the conversation proceed further, you'll see Shadid on the clip say, don't help them. Well, he wasn't like implying not to help Khalil Allah, and he wasn't implying to not help the other gentleman I was talking to. But what he means by them is Christians. And that's because we are the main group that Shadid targets, misrepresents. He's not a very good person to go to for resources or conversations. If you are a Christian, an atheist, or even a Muslim interacting with him, even though he is a Muslim, he may misrepresent you and not really treat the situation fairly. So anyway, make a long story short, here is the video, and thanks for watching.
In Islam, we say that God only does what befits His Majesty, right? That is only logical because, for example, if I asked you, can God exist and not exist at the same time? You'd say no. Are you limiting God? Well, obviously not. That's just illogical. It's not even a question. Can God exist and not exist at the same
Wait,
time?
so
It
so
doesn't
so
work.
in
Hold
Islam, there's
on,
a hadith that
hold
Allah
on,
became a king.
hold,
Is that
hold on.
illogical too?
My friend, 1 second.
All right,
If
let me bring.
if I asked you, can God forget His knowledge in the middle of timeline? Well, no, because God is eternally all knowing. For Him to forget His knowledge, that's contradicting His nature. He's not God anymore. Therefore, God only does what is in His nature. God only does what befits His Majesty. If God is eternal and infinite, right, and creation is finite, how can infinite exist within finite? That's illogical. It doesn't work. That's a logical contradiction. So it's not me limiting God, it's you limiting God. That's it.
Can you explain the X and not X in that? Because I don't see the X and not X. I see the presupposition that God is limited, that he can't actually interact with the reality he created, but I don't see the X and not X.
No problem. James, can you pour an infinite amount of water in a water cup?
So let me ask you questions so I can clarify.
No, 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 no. Answer mine
Well, no. I
because
want to.
you told me that.
I just want to make sure that I'm following you. Are you saying that God has to exercise all of his ability at full maximum always, or is
God is
God able?
God is logical. God does not do what is illogical.
That's not my question. So let's use this analogy. Let's say that God is can lift all the weight in the world. Could God go into the gym and only bench press 300 pounds, or does God always have to lift all the weight in the world, in your view?
That's a fallacious question. That's simply not what
No,
I'm
no, that,
saying.
that's real question because so look, the problem is that if you say the argument in the
That's
way you're
not
presenting,
my premise, James. That has
well, no,
nothing to do
I'm
with my
saying,
premise.
I'm saying, well, you need to answer the question so I can follow you then,
James, but
because
that's not my premise. That question has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
it
That question
absolutely
is
does,
irrelevant to me. James, my
because you're
just
presupposing the limitation on God, but you're not
James,
justifying.
that's not what I'm saying, James. Again, all I'm saying is it's very simple. God does not do what is contradicting of his nature, right? Saying I'm
You
not
haven't
saying
shown
that.
the
Hold
ex.
on, man. Wow, like, wow, you talk a lot. I swear. 1 second. Um, all I'm saying, I'm not saying that God can has to use all his abilities at once all the time. That's not the point I'm making. I'm saying that God does not contradict his nature. What that means is, I gave many examples. I gave, if God is all knowing eternally, that is his attribute, which exists eternally within his essence. Therefore, for you to say God can forget his nature is impossible because that is self contradicting. He's not God anymore if he forgets his knowledge, which is eternal, right? If we
You're
can
actually
agree that
moving
God,
the goalpost.
pardon me?
Your assertion was that it does not befit God's majesty to interact with this physical
No,
reality,
to enter, to enter his creation.
but you
God
haven't given
interacts,
the
yes.
you've given the assertion that
Yes, and I
but
asked
you
you a
haven't
question
claimed.
you would refuse to answer. I said, uh, I gave an example. I said, can you, if God is infinite, right? God is infinite. Creation is finite. By the law of non-contradiction, infinite cannot exist within finite. And you said, "Oh, well, I don't understand what that means." I said, "Simple. Can you pour an infinite amount of water in a water cup? No, you can't. That's illogical.
So
It's not even a
you
question."
ignored my question, which
But
would
your prophet
clarify
says
that
otherwise, Ibn.
because you're assuming that in that question that God always has to act with his maximum ability.
No, no, James, that's very different than Jesus
N-
himself saying, "I cannot do it." The Father
No,
can.
no, we're
That's
not. No, please, guys,
No,
that's
don't shift to
that's
the.
different.
not what we're discussing.
Let's not shift to the knowledge now. We're talking about whether or not God can place any limitations upon himself, or whether or not it's a logical contradiction for God to interact with our reality. I, as a
Okay,
Christian,
I
Is
see where
God
you're coming
infinite?
from. Hold on, I
I,
see
as a
where you're coming
Christian,
from. Yeah,
would
yeah.
say no, and I would say that
James,
God can.
James. Can you take a part of infinity out?
What was that?
Can you take a part of infinity out?
Well, that's what I was asking you. By your
That's what I'm asking
definition,
you. No, you
no, no,
can't.
I need to
You
understand
can't
because
take
I don't.
logic.
No, because I wouldn't claim that about God.
So God didn't limit himself.
You guys, can I just answer Ibn's question about can you fit
He's
infinity into a
he's
cup?
actually on the phone right now, so we need to wait. No, so my claim is not that you could fit infinity into a cup. That's a straw man, and it's often thrown out in this. But you have to explain why God cannot create a reality that he can interact with, because you have to
Oh
put
no,
that limitation on.
but if that's not the case, then let me just understand your question before I have to explain something to you. Because if that's a straw man, then I'm not even understanding what you're meaning that God can that you believe that God can enter creation. Like the first question is God infinite?
So the thing is that that's what I was asking him. Does he believe that all God's power and all God's actions have to always be at
That's
the
not has
maximum?
nothing to do with what
If
I'm
we're
saying.
doing an internal critique, why would you need to ask him any questions?
Because there's two thoughts going on. One, he's put the limitation on God, saying that God
No,
can't
you're putting a limitation on God, not
reality,
me.
and I'm saying that God does not have that limitation, but that God can use his power as he pleases. He can use the maximum amount, or he can use a limited amount.
James,
God
can
can
you
Wait, why
take
are
a
we going to
part of
power?
infinity out?
because that's the issue.
James, hold on,
But
James.
wait,
Let me try to give an answer to
We're
that
you
not even
because
because
you
I'm not
didn't
even
want to
talking
go to
about
knowledge.
Hold on one
James,
He's
second.
not
just give
talking
me a
about
chance.
God's
I'm listening.
power or
James.
God's knowledge
Hold
or
on.
any of like anything.
One.
Ibn is just
Yeah, I'm not
asking,
even
can
talking
the
about God's power.
and
Yeah.
he's literally
James,
just
I don't
saying,
know why
is
you keep
God
asking me
infinite?
about God's power.
So
You
by
guys,
If
definition,
God,
let me try to explain. James, hold on, man. Just give
Gooder,
me a
Gooder,
second,
no, no,
all
no,
right?
Gooder, look, look,
this is gonna derail.
you come in,
I'm
it's just
not
gonna.
trying to derail. I want
Okay,
to answer the
I
Ibn
know you're
I'm
not
question
done.
trying
straight
to,
up.
brother, but that's necessarily what's gonna happen.
All right, I'm done, Gooder. You can just go. I'll just talk to these guys later. I'm not doing like two or
No,
three
James, I
people.
was trying to get him to stop so you could go. So it doesn't seem like most of the times when you leave a room, James, somebody's actually trying to back you up and get other people to be quiet. And because just for the simple fact that somebody's speaking over you, you don't listen to what they're saying and then you leave the room. I was trying to get Gooder to
No,
hold on one
I
second so you could
telling,
go.
I was telling Gooder that if he chooses to keep interjecting, then I'm just not going to interact anymore. Because there's no point in him trying to answer the question when I have issues with the question in general. And when he's saying infinity and he's implying that to God, I'm asking, does God have control over, like, for example, let's say infinity is 500 pounds on the bench. Does God always have to be doing everything at 500 pounds? Or can God go to the gym and rep 250?
That's a
From
fallacy of equivocation, my friend. I don't think
from the Christian framework,
my God.
God can limit his power, and he doesn't have to exercise everything.
That
James, I'm
means
not
that his
talking about
power's
his
not
power.
infinite then.
So then that's, you answered my question. That means that God is exercising his power to the maximum in your view, correct?
No.
James,
If
I'm
God
not
is
talking about God's
infinite,
power.
if God if God, we're not talking about his power or knowledge or any of his attributes, is God in his essence, in his existence, is God infinite?
So this is the problem: is that if you have an
No,
infinite
the
God, that
problem is it's a very simple question that you fail to answer, James.
no,
Is
because
God infinite?
the logical entailment of an infinite God means he has infinite power. He has infinite love. He has infinite mercy. And if you're saying that he can't interact with this reality because he's infinite, then that means that he can't interact love in this reality without loving
Okay,
everyone
okay.
completely. He
James,
But
can't.
we can't
can
get that
God
far
exist
because
and
you
not
won't
exist
answer
at
the
the same
question.
time?
Well,
See,
we
Can I
have
James,
to.
it
mention
seems like
some?
you know what the problem is, but you don't want to answer the question because you know it leads to that.
No, because you guys are building up bad premises, and I'm showing you the
How is
logical
Okay,
that
so
a
entailment.
God's
bad
not
premise?
infinite. You don't believe that God's infinite then. If that's a bad premise, then God's not infinite in your view.
So, no, here's what we're clarifying. What do you mean by
So is
infinite?
God infinite?
So, I think we're using two different definitions of infinite.
When you mean two
And
different definitions, infinity,
my
infinite,
definition, and
infinite.
my definition of infinite, not all God's actions have to be done to an infinite
That's not
degree.
what infinite means.
Then you can have a
That's not what
God
it
who,
means.
then you
Brother
can.
Khalid, can I clarify for James? I
Hold
think
on,
he's not
Rose, 1 second.
understanding.
Please stop interjection. Hold on. James, does God have a beginning? Does God have an end?
God has no beginning and no end.
So
Mhm.
God exists infinitely without a timeline, correct?
Yes.
Then God is infinite. What's so hard about saying God is infinite? God
And
is
God is
infinite.
not arbitrarily limited. If God is also not arbitrarily limited in any sense, then in every aspect God is infinite. God is eternal. He is more, and that's the reason why in the Old Testament that nobody was able to see the face of God. It's because he's so.
You're breaking up a bit, but so in the even in the Old Testament, God was able to still limit his expression to where you could see part of God. You might not have got to see the fullness of God, because you're absolutely right. If God tried to fit infinite in the finite, it would go out the window. But because our God doesn't have that arbitrary limitation that he can't interact with his creation, or that he needs a third party to do it, then our God can send things like God's word. Our God can communicate. Our
James,
God
is
can have
Jesus the
presence.
fullness of God on earth?
So he is the embodiment of the fullness of God on earth.
He's there. You
So
go.
the
How is the
fullness of
fullness of
God, the
God
infinite
inside of
fullness
man?
of God can be embodied.
Did you hear me
Subhanallah.
full
This is
statement, or
No,
or am I
you
going to have
just did it right there, James.
two people misrepresent me?
No. We didn't misrepresent you. We just quoted you.
So when you have Jesus Christ, and you and I have talked about the Trinity long enough, Khalil, for you to know that it's Jesus Christ's human nature that's interacting primarily here, but his divine nature is
Yeah, the not
always at
God part of it.
his divine nature is not fully giving everybody mercy, fully giving everybody justice. These things we've discussed before that there are things that God has put upon Himself for certain actions. So when He asked me that, it's because He doesn't understand that Christ has a human nature.
I understand that Christ has a human nature, my
Then
friend.
you wouldn't have made that
I am
accusation you
fully aware.
made a minute
Yeah,
ago,
but
James,
the
and nobody
thing is that
brought
the
it up.
human nature is the not God part of Jesus, so it's still not even answering the
No,
question.
no, no. And no
You
one's ever
literally
said
just said
nature.
the fullness of God is embodied. That's all that we needed to hear.
That no, because you're misrepresenting it.
I
If
quoted
you are
you, so are you
look,
misrepresenting yourself?
Khalil,
It's a
you and I have
direct
had this
quote out of
conversation
your mouth.
five. You and I have had this conversations 500 times. If you don't know the distinction between the human nature and the divine nature, I
Nope.
can't help you.
James, there's
Yeah, the
hold
human
on,
nature is the not God
James.
part of Jesus.
Yeah, put the human nature aside. We're not talking about the human nature. They're two different natures:
Yeah.
100% man and 100% God.
I
We're
wouldn't
talking about 100% God
100%.
right now.
I wouldn't use 100% man, 100% God.
Fully
That's
man and fully God. Fully same thing. Fully man, fully God. We're talking about the fully God part of
so
Jesus. He has two
with
natures.
so within Jesus, you have that expression through the human nature, which is the full embodiment of God. That is
Yeah.
acting, that is completely God acting within this world in that human nature. Period. Because
Is
you
that
can't divide
oh,
the two.
hold on, James, let
Okay,
me just
there's
clarify. Are you saying that God's infiniteness is embodied?
No, we're not saying his complete infinite is embodied. That's why I was
Okay, so
trying
then
to
he's not fully
explain
God then. In the flesh, then there would be part of you're only taking part of the infiniteness of God and embodying it. So he's
no,
not
because
fully
you
God then.
no, because you have the human nature. There's a distinction between the
No, the
human nature.
human nature is the not God part of Jesus. We're not worried about the
No,
human nature. We're only worried
understand.
about the divine nature.
You
okay.
would
Let me
understand.
give an example, Khalil. Let me get
No,
James.
no, hang on.
God is
Look,
no.
you got
Hold
to let
on,
me talk. I'm
No,
because
trying
you're
to let
being
you.
guys,
fallacious.
we gotta
Look,
let James speak. I'm guilty of this. I've been
I'm
speaking
talking of you
over
guys
talking
at
him too
once.
much. Go ahead, James.
So it would be a heresy if I were to mix into some kind of hybrid or demigod. That's not what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that there is a complete human nature and there's a complete divine nature that is joined through this incarnation process. That, for the sake of this part of the conversation, we'll call a mystery so that we don't have to go in that direction. But within that, the divine nature um, is always can act in a maximum way, but the divine nature can also limit its actions. So Christ, while he's on earth, his human nature is fully present here. His divine nature still has all the abilities to act in an infinite way or to act in a limited way.
Okay, James. What I'm trying to ask you is, for example, right? You're saying that Jesus' divine nature was in partly infinite. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what we're saying at all.
That it's either it's partly infinite or it's fully infinite. Well, I mean,
We've literally said that his divine nature is infinite.
so is it fully infinite or
Maybe
partly
Okay,
infinite?
was
maybe
his
he wants to
divine?
say
Go ahead.
maybe he wants to say that the divine nature of Jesus being the same essence as the Father.
it is fully infinite on one hand. But I think he's also saying that the manifestation of that divine nature that is displayed in the human nature is finite. So the divine nature is infinite, but the human nature, because the human nature is finite, it only shows to other people a finite degree of the
We're
divine
okay with
nature.
that. We're
I'm
100%
just
okay with that.
guessing.
Let
I'm
him
just
explain that
I'm just
himself, though.
guessing, by the way. I'm
We
just
don't know
trying to
what he means unless
offer
he says it himself.
offer
We should let him
something.
explain that himself. I think that's
Yeah,
best.
no,
Yeah.
that's
Okay,
fine. I'm
James
just
is
trying to help the
Don't
conversation.
help them. Don't help. Let
okay.
them say it
James is
themselves.
hold
Okay,
on,
well,
Shadid. Hold on.
Shadid just wants to be
Is what
hostile. So I'm done. Shadid's not getting in this conversation. I'm done.
No, I'm not in the
oh my
conversation. I was
God,
talking
man.
to
What?
Khalil,
No,
not you. No,
no,
no.
no, no.
Shadid
I
is
was
a
talking to
logic
Look,
Khalil,
man.
I
not
talked
you.
to
Come
Don't
on.
worry. Don't worry. I was
look. I
talking to
already
Khalil.
talked to two other people, and you jump
I was
in.
talking
So
to
He
Khalil,
wasn't
not
even
you.
talking to
I was
you, man.
talking to
no,
Khalil,
no, no,
not
no,
you.
no. Look,
Again,
look.
I
No, no.
just offered my comment because it feels like a lot of time is being wasted on semantics. So I'm offering it as, so we can get on the same page, and then you can proceed with the
So here's
critique.
my issue, just so I can be clear. I'm having a conversation with two people. One person jumps in to try to help explain the situation, who's knowledgeable on these topics. And then Shadid says, no, no, no. Let James continue the 2-on-1 attack against him. Don't help him. You can
There's no
leave me
attack
alone,
here.
Shadid. I'm
No,
not doing
I
these
was
games.
just saying to let you explain it
No,
yourself
I'm
because
not
that's the
doing
best
these
way to
games.
understand the person
No.
is let the person explain it themselves. That's all I was saying. Be relax, okay? I was just saying let you
Because
explain it
I've been
yourself. We
trying.
don't know what you mean. If Khalil speaks for you, we don't
He's
know if
gone,
that's what
man.
you
He's
mean
gone. He
since
always
it's not
does
you
this.
talking.
He
Yeah, I
always
know
does
he's
this.
weak.
He
He's weak.
Again, I'm
always
just
does.
trying to help the
Don't
conversation.
help them. Don't help. Let
Okay,
them say it
James is
themselves.
hold on.
Don't help them. Don't help. Let
Okay.
them.
I
Adorai.
go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint.